What's up, guys? People here, and this is going to be our first installment after the intro to Trad Canvas Thursdays. And our first head up as to my favorite heads, my top 10 favorite heads currently, like as of the time that I'm making these videos, is the Stallion 700 from STX. And I mean, I already kind of went over what specifically that I'm going to be going over as far as what I feel makes a really good traditional head, as far as what I'm looking for. But so I'm just going to get right into it and talk about how the Stallion kind of meets those requirements. So first off, the offset kind of meets my requirements because most of the time when you just kind of be like, okay, I'm just going to put a trad in a head, most people will just throw a trad in the head. But with the Stallion, I feel that even if you are kind of that mid to mid-low kind of traditional pocket user, even though the offset kind of has the curvature for a mid to high pocket, it doesn't have a super drastic one, so pretty much any trad that you really decide to put in it, it's going to be nice and solid. So even if you put, say, a mid-low sort of trad setting, because of how most of the time trads are going to break in and everything like that, no matter what you do, the pocket's going to shift a little bit higher. So even if your pocket is set for a bit lower setting, it'll shift just a little bit higher and have a nice solid sweet spot, and it'll just sit right there. As far as a traditional is concerned, I feel that's a really important thing. Another thing that I feel the Stallion 700 really meets my requirements is that the throat, it's not too long and it's not too wide and everything like that, but because the first thing is the throat doesn't have any holes going on to where the leathers can go through, and usually I really want that. But even if it doesn't have that, the ergonomics of the throat, like the curvatures and everything, to where like your hand could probably sit in those curves, it really helps the fact that most people that have trads, they like to wrap around the leathers around the throat in order for them to not move, in order to tie them off, everything like that. So it doesn't really get in the way of your hand going up there, but it wraps around nicely, and that's really important to me, is being able to effectively tie off a traditional, because too often you see really disgusting tie-offs, and it's not really so much the fault of the stringer themselves, but the head. Usually, again, the head has to kind of meet what you need to be going on. Another really big thing with the Stallion 700 for me is its scoop. The scoop just, one of the biggest things is guys don't, it's the maintenance when it comes to traditionals. With a Stallion 700, as you can see, there's everything but no protection for the leathers at the top. So whether or not you're using a removable top string or you're just going straight attached like this one is, it's going to be a solid attachment. You're not going to have to worry about too much maintenance when it comes to the leathers being scraped and anything. If anything, you won't have to worry at all, just because of how it's kind of recessed and everything. So, and then as far as protection goes, that's really solid. And then when it comes to spacing, not a whole lot of people have ever really liked the Stallion for its top hole spacing, but if you want a solid, and I keep using that word because it's true, if you want an effectively solidly spaced pocket that has a decent release, more or less no matter what you do with the pocket, Stallion really meets that, because even though the two center are just a little wider than you usually would have, it doesn't really affect or disrupt much of anything as far as the spacing and having the correct spacing for what you want to have happen. The side top top string holes, they line up almost perfectly with the sidewall itself, the plastic, and that's a big thing to where if you want a very channeled pocket, like this isn't super broken in just yet, but as far as wanting a really channeled pocket, most of the time I try to have these outer leathers as close to being lined up with the plastic as possible, to where it doesn't mess with the pocket too much, just because one, you want to be able to cradle pretty well, and having a little bit wider line leathers helps with that, and the Stallion allows you to do that pretty well. And just off the bat, without doing anything too crazy with the leathers for spacing, the actual bottom holes are pretty, like the most outer bottom holes for the Stallion 700 are fairly wide, to where it doesn't feel too much like the leathers are bunching at the bottom. So like push it out a little bit, the leathers kind of space themselves out nicely. So I mean, just all in all, top and bottom holes are pretty well spaced, just as standard, without having to do anything too crazy to attach them. Moving into the actual sidewalls, as far as spacing and everything like that, spacing wise, they're really effective. I've gone over it in the review that they're pretty good for your mesh pockets, but I feel that they really meet what you want as far as a traditional is concerned. There's not a huge multitude of them, which some people might not really like, as far as being able to do a bunch of casting points. So each point in between knots for your sidewall design, or sidewall stringing. Most of the time I try not to have too many, because I like to have a little bit more hold with my traditionals. So I go without really giving up too much as far as performance. I try to go with just a little amount of casting points as possible in order to have an effective pocket, while still having the pocket look the way it's supposed to. The Stallion has, let's see, let me count it out just because, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 sidewall holes. Your average head has about 14 to 19 holes, and then you have your String King that has 29. But so as far as holes are concerned, it doesn't have a multitude, like I said, but it has enough to get the job done, especially with other crazier traditionals compared to my classic here. But so it will take pretty much anything that you need as far as sidewalls are concerned. And the good thing is, like, even with the C channel, a lot of people don't really like C channel as far as traditionals are concerned, but the Stallion doesn't have too much of a standout C channel going on. It's effective, but it's not too standout to where it affects anything stringing wise for traditionals. And I mean, your overall face shape of a head can determine how a mesh pocket looks and performs. It's the same thing with a traditional, and I feel that the Stallion 700 doesn't have a super long pinch going on, but it has a nice, I guess, a nice flow of the pinch to the scoop, to where you can have an effective pocket without having to really worry about the ball coming out. And just in general, as far as actually like freehanding and putting a pocket into a Stallion, I feel it takes one. Like, I'll sit there and I'll just string. I'll just string, and it's like the heads will talk to me effectively, or essentially. And as I'm stringing, I'm like, okay, this is going to be a good pocket. Get halfway done. Yeah, this is going to be a good pocket. Get almost done. You're like, I really want to keep this, sort of thing. It's one of those heads for me. It's like the head just speaks to me like, this is a good trad head. There's a fair amount of heads that do that, and I've said that before, but I feel that as of currently, the Stallion, and it's not the best, it's not the worst or anything like that. It's just the first one I want to talk to you guys about. But the Stallion 700, I feel, is one of the top 10 best heads right now, to date, to take a traditional. I just feel, one, the head is amazing in and of itself, but once I've put a trad in it, I've put mesh in it, I feel once you put a trad in it, it's just magic. And that's saying a lot in the most part, but I mean, I can't explain all of how I feel that this head is effective, one of the more effective ones for a traditional, but those are most of my key points that I'm looking at for a traditional head. But the balance is there. It's not super heavy. Even if you put the traditional in it, it doesn't end up being too heavy, stuff like that. And I don't know, it's just one of those things where you're just like, man, that's a good traditional head. Like, that takes it really well. Like, you can see just how the head flows. I mean, one, it looks like it should take a trad. Like, you can see the flow of how the sidewall here kind of flows into the shape of the pocket, and then just overall, it's a mean and very solid head for a traditional. So that's the Stallion 700, and well, not editing that out because we're already about 12 minutes into this. But so that's the Stallion 700, guys, from STX, and it's one of my top 10 heads currently for traditional. Any traditional, not just classic, but symmetrical pockets too. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next episode.